Got this show on the road. I better speak up then. Is that better? Well, that worked. Okay. Right. It looks as though we're going to do questions after. I certainly don't mind them during the talk, but if we start to get too many, it does slow things down a bit. So we'll just see what happens. I'd certainly we'll answer some quick ones on the way through, but if they get a bit long, we might wait till the end. But if we do that, make sure you don't make me get away without answering the question. Just a little bit on my story, and even though I answered, I spoke about this on the bus. I'll just go through this really quickly. I put where I come from, roughly down here in this part of Australia. And that's 200 miles northwest of Sydney. Myself and my son Nicholas on the farm, and then, as I mentioned before, my grandson's just starting to work on the farm as well. It's 2,000 acres. We just have granite soils, not very fertile soils. 26-inch rainfall. It is now a restored native grassland. And no irrigation. Just what the enterprises are. Just bottom this year, we've been merino sheep now for 150 years. Not me personally. As I mentioned before, my great grandparents settled in 1868. Also, on the farm, we do some cattle finishing, not a lot. It depends on a lot of things, depends on how much feed we've got. It also depends on the cost of cattle at the time. And at the moment, if we were trying to finish cattle, we'd be doing it for practice because cattle are too expensive to buy. So, just a few other things. I started breeding Kelpie dogs 40 years ago, Kelpie working dogs. They're an Australian dog. And they've been sold all over the world, including in the US here. And a merino ram breeding enterprise my father started in the late 1940s. And this one here, which actually is not necessarily it's not the best income, but it's the most profitable. Harvesting and selling native grass seed from our grassland, because there's no cost in it. These grasses are just growing on their own, and we're harvesting and selling this. There's very little cost in it. And obviously the crop side of things, about a quarter of the farm is used for sowing crops. There's a reason why it's a quarter and not half, or not 3/4. The main reason being that I can grow 500 acres of crop and I don't have to reduce or change my livestock numbers. That's partly due to not only the percentage of the property, but also the way pasture cropping does and how much feed it produces for livestock. Where are we up to? So this is what most producers want to look at. How can we be more profitable? And what is interesting, around the world and all the countries I get to, it's a very similar story. The farmers are struggling on the land, and we shouldn't be. And there's a reason for it, which I'm going to address. It was actually touched on this morning. So to be more profitable, the only way we can really work this out is we should have a look at what's gone wrong. Why aren't we more profitable than our parents and grandparents and even great-grandparents have been? You know, we're not worse farmers, but often the situation has changed. So I'm going to go back a fair way, obviously. Agriculture, as we know it, actually started in Mesopotamia 10,000 years ago by the Sumerian people. And they started to harvest wheat from their grassland. Now, wheat in the grassland was just a native plant in their grassland. And also oats and barley and those small seeds were in those grasslands as well. And then sheep and goats were domesticated. So modern Western agriculture is actually modelled off that form of agriculture that they started. Now, how this happened, I don't think I've got it on my next slide. No, the Egyptians adopted those practices from the Sumerians. The Romans also adopted it, and then it ended up being adopted in Europe. That form of agriculture that the Sumerians started was adopted right through until Europe got it, and then we got it here and also Australia and everywhere else. So, but the problem with that, the Sumerians ran into problems with it also. They had major saline areas, salinity areas. Their irrigation channels that they developed was silted. They silted up. They had major problems with the whole thing. The wheels basically fell off. But we continued to adopt that system that was already failed in Mesopotamia. So in other words, for 10,000 years we have killed grasslands and destroyed soil by growing crops and grazing animals. And it's partly, not necessarily all, but partly related to the method of agriculture that we adopted. Interestingly, around the planet, some of the native people, the regional people, developed agricultural systems that worked and actually continued to work for thousands of years. But ours seems to be falling over. So we need to have a look at what we can do about that. So instead of improving those agricultural methods, we've actually made things worse. So what is wrong with modern agriculture? By this time, people often chuck rocks at me because I don't think there's anything wrong with modern agriculture. So, my family's also been part of the problem. Now, my great-grandparents, well, at least my great-grandfather, before he only had one leg, he wasn't born with that. It's not a genetic defect. he actually fell off a wagon and got run over with the wagon because the horses were bolting and had to have his leg amputated. Now, yeah, I will tell this story because it's sort of part of the whole thing. But I'll just get onto that in a minute. But they were some of the original pioneers in the area, and it started with merino sheep, as many. That's the way Australia sort of evolved. I'm not tracking, but just quickly, the reason why we end up with merino sheep in Australia is because it was an unperishable product. It could be exported to England, and the King of England could put a tax on it. So, so wool was, and it was too far away, a bit like here, to Europe, but it was even further than that. So that merino sheep and wool were an ideal thing for that at that era, and they found that Australia was perfect for merino sheep and wool, perfect environment. Anyway, I won't go too far into that. I will touch on a little bit on they started growing wheat in 1868, but that was only done by hand. Okay, now, just a little thing here. When my great-grandfather there lost his leg, it's an interesting thing. How do you run a farm with only one leg? It'd be difficult enough now, but in the late 1800s, it was even more difficult. How do you hop behind a plough and a horse team ploughing a paddock? Very difficult. What happened? They swapped roles. Catherine here, or Granny, as everyone referred to her, went and ran the farm. He went into the house and did all the housework and looked after nine kids, 9 children. So they just switched roles. But old Granny, being female, and she was a bit of a tyrant, she did it her way. And she did it differently. She managed the sheep differently. Also, she happened to be a shepherd's daughter, so she had really good skills on livestock and sheep. So she went and ran the farm and ran it totally differently. She nurtured those sheep, and she was well aware of the grasslands and even soils in that era, and nurtured everything. Now, where I'm getting at here with this little story might seem irrelevant. Her firstborn grandson, she had a great deal of influence on her firstborn grandson, and also spoke about how to manage the farm, about how we should be nurturing animals and doing it differently. And her firstborn grandson happened to be my father. Now, she had a great influence on her firstborn grandson and passed down the line. Some of the things that I've done is related to this old lady that I never ever met, my great-grandmother. Also, what I'm getting at here, she had a great influence on the whole farm, did it differently and did it really well. What I'm saying here is that part of the way we can fix our farms really quickly is to have more women involved in agriculture, because women are nurturers. You can't help yourself, you just are. However, on the other hand, us males, if we're honest with ourselves, are really not nurturers at all. Mostly we wake up each morning and think about what we're going to kill today. And in agriculture, we kill things with ploughs and bulldozers and pesticides. So in making, and I've been saying this about needing more women in agriculture, and when I first started to say this in Australia, there were very cranky men up the back that wanted to throw rocks at me for saying that. So I'll see the rocks coming and I'll duck. But it's actually a very easy way of starting a process of fixing agriculture. We need to nurture it. Agriculture should be about nurturing things, not killing things. So, however, my father, who was old Granny's grandson, he didn't listen to her fully. So 60 years of farming with horses, industrial agriculture was adopted in the 1930s by my father. And he did start with horse teams, and then he said the best thing ever invented was a tractor. So he started down this way. He was actually following some of the best science of the day, even in the 1930s. But within 20 years, major damage to soil and grasslands had occurred. He was growing wheat on wheat on wheat for 20 years and did huge damage. Now, photo on the left-hand side there shows my father in the early 1930s standing in a wheat crop. No fertiliser in that wheat crop, no pesticides either. There were no pesticides available to him, but he put no fertiliser on it. Now, I think by now, after this morning, we probably know how he could grow a crop like that, because that was still, the soil was still grassland soil. He ploughed the grassland, sowed the crop, amazing results. That's a good wheat crop in any era, let alone 1930. Taller varieties, obviously. So, but anyway, we'll get on to this here. That same paddock, 5 years later, my mother took a photo, not of the paddock, but of this wedge-tailed eagle, one of our main eagle. And their wingspan 6 feet wide. They're big, very big birds. But people used to shoot them. But what I'm interested in here is that photo, and only 5 years later, is also showing this major erosion right behind. And my father had huge problems with erosion, and they ended up 10 feet deep. Those gullies there. It was a great embarrassment to him that the whole farm was washing away, but created by his farming practices. Now, to fix those problems, in the 1950s, the father adopted, which had become then which is now called the Green Revolution agriculture, from about the 1950s on, and I'm going to explain what that is, but you probably all know what that is here. So from that time on, from 1950 to 78, they started to use more and more fertiliser in crops, and he certainly was, and also started down the road of all sorts of pesticides, mostly for insect problems. So what he was doing was ploughing and cultivating soil. There was nothing new in that era. That was just normal. It was the only thing they had. But high use of fertiliser and pesticides, and he was set grazing, like the animals just stayed where they were put. It actually worked very well. That high input system was very productive and profitable in that era. So there was nothing really wrong with it at that time. And my father did really well through that from 1950 to 1970, which I'll continue on with. Now, I came home from school in the 1970s, and I continued the destruction of the farm with ploughs and pesticides. I was fortunate that my father didn't give me a bigger tractor and plough, otherwise I'd have done a lot more damage than I did. So, when I look at those photos now, I get quite shocked at how bare everything was. It was amazing. I'm sort of like wonder how he ran the sheep he did. So I was growing plants that want to die and killing plants that want to live. That's often what we do. Like something that wants to live there, we seem to think we want to kill it, and we'll plant something that wants to die anyway. So usually some new whiz-bang plant that someone's bred at great expense that we buy and then plant and it dies. So, but that was what I was doing those days. So over time, industrial agriculture was doing serious ecological damage to the property. We didn't know that at the time. No one did. No one was putting a link in agriculture and ecology at all. So these problems started to emerge. Now, what my father was spending those times was on fertiliser and pesticides mostly, was $100,000 annually on today's figures. So it actually started to crash quite early on us, or mostly my father. during the 1970s, partly because fertiliser costs became too high was one of the things. Like we were getting similar, or he was getting similar problems then with rising costs of everything, as we seem to get now. So cost of resowing pastures was high, soil lost structure, and consequently rainfall no longer infiltrated. Soil became acidic. We had salinity problems as well, like bare patches, and we didn't know what they were for a while. Turns out they were dry land salinity or salt areas. We had trees dying, and we were going rogue. Really, it wasn't good, and it was interesting how quickly it all crashed from when my father started with the high input methods to when the wheels started seriously falling off. So, now this slide, some of you may have seen it. It was for some research work in Canada, so it's only over the fence, so basically. And it's from 1926 to 2016. And it looks at, profits, financial data from that period. Now, farmers from the 1920s, 30s, and all the way up to the late 1970s, this is in Canada, were doing okay compared to agribusiness. Now, from about 1980, somewhere in there, farmers started going broke. Agribusiness was making billions of dollars. And here, I mean, this. What's interesting, this data fits almost perfectly in Australia as well as Canada, and most likely fits in here as well. So when we look at this here, agribusiness making all that sort of profit while we're going broke, that's bloody nearly criminal, to use a few Australianisms. So how do we change that? I mean, that isn't good when you look at that. Now, what I'm talking about here is not the local supplier of products, but the big end of town, which is pushing all this stuff. The guy that's selling product locally, he's just trying to make a living like everyone else. But the big end of town is a bit of a different story. So many of the things we do in agriculture make someone else wealthy, not farmers. We seem to get the wrong end of the pineapple all the time. And that's a big part of the problem, of what's going on, why things are hard on the land, on our farms. The cost of production is just too high. We usually try to address it by being more and more and more productive, and that's how it's promoted and encouraged. Be more productive. Yeah, be more productive, use more product. That works mostly for the big end of town, again, and not us. So how do we fix these problems? Now, I'm not an organic producer, I'm not promoting anything really, and there's nothing wrong with fertilisers and pesticides. I'm certainly not being anti-anything. So, although fertiliser and pesticides can be an aid to agriculture, they have created many problems for our farm soils and profit. And it comes down to this: the way we graze animals, the way we grow crops isn't working. The way we graze animals isn't working. And this is what's really happens. Both of them kills grasslands and pasture, destroys the soil ecosystem and destroys the farm ecosystem. I'm going to talk more about that later. Our farm soil has become dysfunctional. This is why we need ever increasing amounts of fertiliser and pesticides to maintain crop yields and pasture. And to add to that, if you're finding that every year with cropping programs you need more fertiliser, need to increase the fertiliser rate, it means really that your soil ecosystem has crashed. And it's only really starting to act almost like a hydroponic system. If we need to add more and more, especially more and more fertiliser, if we're finding that we're getting more and more insect attack, there's a fair chance that the farm ecosystem has collapsed. So most of the problems, if not, or I won't say all, most of the problems we've got in agriculture are actually not agricultural problems, they're ecological problems. Very few people ever approach it from that direction. So increasing fertiliser and pesticides will not fix our farms, because that's not the problem. The farm and soil ecosystems are broken, how can we fix it? Now, just in relation to that, a headache that we get is not caused from lack of Panadol. Lack of Panadol isn't the problem. And often, most of our farm systems are like crashing. Same thing, it's not lack of fertiliser that's the problem. So how can we fix our farm, soil as well as being productive and profitable? We need to make sure we get back to being profitable again. And how can that be done without spending excessive amounts of money? Now, our farms should function as ecosystems. Now, just really quickly to explain about ecosystems, ecosystems, and this is very much an oversimplification. So, natural ecosystems are self-sustaining and resilient. Now, wouldn't it be wonderful if our farms were self-sustaining and resilient? Now, everything, plants, animals, soil and the environment are all interconnected in an ecosystem and self-supporting. Now, our farms can function like that as well. If they start functioning like that, all of our problems go away because old Mother Nature's driving it for us. Actually, it seems like a bit of a harebrained idea and scheme, but it's really, really simple. There's nothing, we don't need to change very much to start head down this way. We just need to tweak things around the edges a little. We don't have to sell our tractor and our boom spray and our seed drill. We keep all them. So, allow the farm and soil to function as an ecosystem. I'm going to talk about soils functioning as an ecosystem in a minute as well. So, if we get our farms and soil functioning as ecosystems, we will get better nutrient cycling, which means that we use less fertiliser. No insect attack, no insecticide, no plant disease, no fungicide, less animal disease and more profit. So how and why did I change? So after the adoption of Green Revolution agriculture by my father, the farm started to crash. That method of agriculture was destroying our farm ecosystem and soil ecosystem and sending us broke. Now, if we modify, and we only need to modify it, how we graze animals and grow crops, we can restore our soil structure, we can improve nutrient cycling, we can improve water infiltration and water holding capacity, improve soil carbon, manage crop disease, reduce inputs of fertiliser and pesticides and increase profit. We can do all of that. And it's really easy. And the first thing we need to do is start to fix our soil. And we can fix the soil easily, we just need to grow more plants. Plants really are the drivers of all this. And guess what? If we grow more plants, we can make more money. Now, I'm going to tell you a little story. I was doing a talk many years ago in a rural town which had not only the reputation but was renowned for the drug industry in Australia, especially marijuana. So this is going back to 85 years, maybe more. And I made that statement now, I made a statement, if grow more plants will make more money. But yep, what I actually said then, if we grow more grass will make more money. Well, the whole audience fell on the floor laughing. They thought it was hilarious. And there was about 50 people in the room, because it was true for their area. So anyway, but if we grow more plants, especially a diverse range of plants, we will make more money. So we need to cover our soil and farms with a diverse range of living plants. So, but not monocultures of plants. Single species in pastures and crops are also a major part of the problem. So we need to get away from that. But that's not always easy. I'm not suggesting some of this is simple. So, but we need more diverse pastures and crops. But the way to do that in cropping programs, as we've found out this morning, is with multi-species covers in part of the rotation. And it definitely works. So, plants will restore our farm soils and profit. We can do this a few different ways. We can restore the perennial grassland, or if we plant a pasture, it needs to be really diverse. It needs to function like a grassland. So, and we're talking here of 50 to 100 plant species, or more if you can get it. Like I said this morning, and I was only estimating that there would have been 300 or 400 species in your prairies. Now, there's probably someone here that knows how many species were. There was about 300 in the Australian grassland, but I would assume there'd be a lot more species diversity in your grassland. So, the pasture cropping that I developed retains that grassland and plants crops into it. That's simply what that is. But multi-species crops and multi-species covers is also a very important part of how we can change or modify this. So, during the 1970s, there were very few options other than applying more fertiliser and pesticides and going gradually. So, and that's what was happening on our farm. However, today we have a lot more options. There's plenty of good options out there. And the type of things I'm going to talk about today are not the only things. There's a range of really good methods we can use to move our farms forward and also aim to reduce our costs on farm. Now, I had my decision made for me. So I didn't have to really think a lot about change. I was forced into it. So we had a major wildfire in 1979, and of the 4,000 sheep we had, 3,000 were killed in it. All the buildings were destroyed. Most of the fencing was burned, and we had no money. We were broke in one day. So that takes a bit of handling. It was like an atomic bomb went off. It was that severe. And anyone that's been in a fire here knows how that can be. So that fire in 1979 changed everything. I couldn't afford the old ways of doing things. We were absolutely broke. I searched for other ways of managing the property. So how did I change? I looked for low input agriculture. Well, mine had to be more than low input. It had more than low input. It had to be no input agriculture. I couldn't afford anything really. So a lot of the things that I developed and adopted came from that of being absolutely broke and just trying to survive financially. I mean, people think the pasture cropping idea is a wonderful development. How did you possibly think of that? It came out of necessity. There's no great philosophy behind it when we developed it. So I looked for low input methods. I stopped using fertiliser, especially pasture fertiliser and pesticides. I adopted holistic plant grazing. Now, I didn't develop holistic plant grazing, Alan Savory did. But I adopted that, and I'm going to talk a bit about grazing here later, and developed pasture cropping. Both of those similar time in 93. And then what I did was combine both of those, and then it really started to work and make a lot of sense. Once I combined the two. What I really focused on was 100% ground cover. Now, a lot of these things, when you try to work them out, well, for me, were almost instinctive. I didn't really know why we needed more ground cover. What I did know was in gardens, and vegetable gardens and just gardens generally, everyone ever has used mulch, put mulch and cover on their gardens. Now, I got thinking, why don't we do this in our paddocks and fields? And same thing now, why don't we do that in our paddocks and fields? Okay, it's a bit more difficult than a garden, but we can. And in grazing systems, it's relatively easy. We get a good grazing rotation. You could see in the grassland we were in there today how much good ground cover there was. Beautiful ground cover. So we can grow ground cover. In cropping programs now, as we saw at the first stop, really good cover. And that was created from that rye stubble and really good management of crop rotations and cover crops. So ground cover is absolutely critical in this. But what I focused on was restoring when I went to grassland. And I went the other way. I went, like most people were converting their grasslands and pastures to cropping, I went the opposite to that. I must be very stubborn and probably very stupid, I think. So I went against the grain most of the time. But there was a reason why I wanted to restore it to a grassland. I knew that our native plants, and these ones here would be similar, but I knew that the native grassland species didn't require any fertiliser to grow. After all, they'd been growing for millions of years without any fertiliser on them. So, and that was a big driver for me, anything to save money and survive. And that was my thinking then. If I restored this grassland, I wouldn't need to put fertiliser on it. So I'm going to talk a bit about grazing management here, in a general sense. So, and I'm also going to relate this to what happened on the farm at home and why we changed. My grandparents, father and I all grazed the property over many years, for 125 years, using set stock or set grazing. Most of the animals stayed where they were. So I changed the grazing management 30 years ago, in 1993. So, and this is a bit of a repeat of what I just had there a while ago. My father was heavily fertilising the property, and over time required more and more fertiliser to maintain production. But the problem was acidic soils, weeds, compacted soils, saline areas, and less profit. What was happening with the grazing, virtually since my great-grandparents' time, this is how it was grazed, and I won't dwell on this too much, but the mobs of sheep were only 200 to 300, and they were split into their age groups of 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5 years old. And I got thinking about this. Why are we splitting all these animals in their age groups? I don't think they care what ages they all are. So I just put them all together. Except for the 1-year-olds. They just need a bit more higher quality feed to grow. So this is how they were run how I was doing it previously, but especially my father. After paddocks were grazed 2 to 3 weeks, the sheep were moved onto fresh paddock. No great planning in that, just like playing drafts. That was all. The sheep were returned to graze after the grass had grown about 6 inches high, no matter what the time was. So the way I was grazing was not working. The animals were doing serious damage to the farm soil, pasture and profit. Now, this is a really valuable slide to understand this. And it's a valuable slide for understanding pasture cropping, but in this sense I'm talking about grazing. And Christine Jones, many of you may have heard of Christine. This is a slide that Christine put together quite a few years ago. And when she showed this slide, the penny dropped for me. It made perfect sense when she showed this. Hopefully it'll make sense to you. If we look at these 3 plants, they're all the same species. Doesn't matter what they are, other than they're a perennial grass. And this one here on this side is fully recovered. And the one on this side has been continuously grazed. If we look at the root systems, well, the top and bottom, the leaves and roots on those 3, we'll see here this one has a huge root system on it and a big leaf area. And if we cut the top, all the leaves off, dried and weighed them, and the roots off and dried them and weighed them, they'd weigh about the same. This is in a grass plant. So we go to this poor little guy on this side here. Whoops, wrong. No one should ever give me any technology. So, even this simple. So, okay. This little poor little guy here, he's only got a little bit of leaf on him. Consequently, he only has a very short root system. Now, same plant, just managed differently, grazed differently. Now, if we think about this little guy over here and ask the question, to start with, how much feed is that one going to produce? Well, not much. There's not much there. How much water is that one going to be able to access? Again, not much. His root systems are too small. How much nutrient is he going to get? Well, not much either. Again, also, roots are very important for feeding our soil life, our soil ecosystems, our soil microbes. So, if we look at this one, how many microbes is that one going to feed? Not many. So, and that's all created by the way those plants were grazed and how much recovery time that they've had. This one's had plenty of time to recover. That one, you can graze them that short, but if you do, you need a very long recovery period. So it's not about always keeping these plants big like that. There's nothing wrong with grazing them even quite short at times, but they need to be fully recovered before they're regrazed. Now, this is not new information at all. And Franklin J. Crider here in the US did work on this in 1955. No one listened, of course, including in Australia. And he said, as well as other things, you can look him up. He did a lot of wonderful work. But this one here, when 80 to 90% of the leaf is removed, all of the roots stop growing. And he nailed it in 1955. As I said, no one listened, except maybe eventually Alan Savory and some of those pioneers in grazing worked it out or found this old information. So, what kills plants? Now, remember, we're still talking about a grazing enterprise here. Certainly, not giving perennial plants enough time to recover from grazing kills plants. They need time to recover before they're regrazed. Now, if any of you have grazed alfalfa, it's an amazing plant, but we know, and we're told often, if we continue to graze alfalfa, it will kill it. But there's no different to almost any other plant. So, including our native grassland species. So, not giving perennial plants enough time to recover from grazing kills them. But it's not the animal that's the problem. It's us humans managing them that's the problem. We keep on wanting to blame the animal, but it's not the animal. They're only doing what they do. So we need to work out a way of doing it where they're not continually grazing. How that's done doesn't matter too much. It may get easier. I've looked at this too. Unfortunately, it's always expensive with virtual fencing. They're getting it. Well, it is available now with cattle. Not, as far as I know, not with sheep yet. So, which doesn't require fencing. But we can talk a bit about that later if we like. This is what I'm doing at home. 2 mobs of sheep mainly. 2,500 adult sheep just in one mob. And I normally keep the younger ones, about 1,500 in another mob. 75 paddocks. Now I must be very lazy. I didn't want to be building fences every day, right? So I built permanent fencing. Sounds difficult, but all that I needed to do was start subdividing the existing paddocks that we had. And I didn't need them ultra small because we had large enough mobs to keep those paddocks a bit larger. So there's 75 paddocks there. Those paddocks, I'll have it on here in a minute too, are about 30 acres, 25 to 30 acres each one of those are. But I've got another slide on that. And about 3 to 4 months recovery period. The sheep, especially the big mob there, are used to prepare paddocks to grow crops. That photo there's my son moving that 2,500 sheep through that gateway. Holistic grazing management with long plant recovery times encourage the growth of perennial grassland species, discourage the growth of annual weeds, improve soil structure and soil health. It will also improve nutrient cycling, enable drought planning, which is a very important thing. Anyone that's done holistic grazing knows all this, because when we know where the animals have been and where they're going to end up, if the season is, we're getting poor amounts of rainfall, we know how much time we have before they run out of feed by just counting the paddocks ahead of them, by counting the area ahead of them. So we can make a decision on what we're going to do. You know, what do we do? Okay, you may want to buy feed in, that's probably the last resort, or you may want to sell them, or you may want to sell them. Sell them is probably the best thing. Or you could put them into a feedlot or whatever. So it creates, there's a lot of advantages in it. And interestingly, that's a mob of 2,500 ewes with their lambs. So there's about 5,000 in that mob. I couldn't fit them all in the photo. Moving them through a gateway. We were just moving them to the yards to wean the lambs. So they become very easy to manage, even in mobs that size. Not a problem at all. Except this, I had with my other son who was working at home for a while, he phoned me up and said, "Dad, come quick." What had happened was that he opened the gate up like that and was behind them with dogs. The first ones, one or two fell over, and the whole lot of the 2,000 went over the top, and the pile of sheep ended up about as big as this building. Well, that's fun. so we both there dragging these sheep out, and we found about 20 dead ones on the bottom. So the answer to that is really simple. Stand at the gateway, like my son's doing there, and if you've got dogs, just let the dogs bring them through. Or if they've already, with sheep and cattle, if they've already started to move through, they'll continue anyway. They don't necessarily need dogs behind them at all. So, just a few things disasters that happen along the way that you learn a lot from. Okay. We're going to talk about a bit now about pasture cropping, perennial cut, what I do with this. I'm not going into heaps of detail with this. If you want more certain information, definitely ask the questions on it. But certainly explain to you what it is. So it's actually, pasture cropping is perennial cover cropping. And the grass itself is actually the cover. So it was developed and invented by myself and Darryl Clough, a neighbour of mine. That bottle there is a bottle of Australian beer. Now, Darryl Clough, we used to get together, him and I, to discuss the problems of the world, as you do. But we always did it with a beer. So this particular night was a bit different for some strange reason. We had about 10 or 12 of those each. And we come up with this lunatic idea. Previously we started zero tilling, and we were using lots of glyphosate and all of that, so things weren't really changing that much anyway. So we started, and not only that, we had some, not a lot. We didn't have a good grassland at all at that stage. This is 40 years ago. So we only had odd grassland species, warm season, C4 grasses. So we got thinking about why are we using really high rates of glyphosate to kill these grasses that we knew were going to go dormant in the winter. As soon as it started to get cold, they just shut down and go to sleep for the winter. So after about 10 or 12 of those beers, it started to make some sense at that stage that why are we killing these things? It made perfect sense when we were drunk at midnight. But next morning, it still made sense, even though we both had a headache. But within about 2 weeks, it just was the timing of it, around our fall period, middle of April, which was a normal time we'd plant crops. And so what we both did was tried this with virtually no preparation at all in the paddock. But we sprayed it with a lower dose of glyphosate this early days, and knowing that we wouldn't kill those perennial grasses, but we would get weed control. So, and we both got really good results. We both produced a crop that we harvested grain from that first year. And so, and we were both amazed. We thought, we might produce some cheap, low-cost stock feed, but that's about all that would happen. But it ended up a lot better than that. So from that time on, I spent a lot more time on this and fine-tuned it and tweaked it around the edges and had a good look at herbicides and what fitted better and all of this. And because I always aimed, from that point on, to produce grain from it. That was always my aim. Well, this is not going to really be that useful unless we can produce grain. And so that's how it started. There's no great philosophy behind it. It was just two guys drunk one night. A lot of people think we're very intelligent, but no. So what it is, it's perennial cover cropping, where annual crops are zero-tilled into dormant grass or grassland. Now, okay, not all grasses do go into full dormancy. So if that happens, it's not a problem in using, I don't think there's a problem in using a herbicide that will shut those grasses down a bit quicker and get some weed control, but providing you don't kill the grasses, because that's what you're wanting to restore. These perennial species are incredibly valuable and we want to keep them. So consequently, over time, I went off glyphosate, not for any reasons other than the damn stuff works too well. It was killing everything. I didn't want to kill everything. I wanted to keep any perennial species, including the cool season ones, in the paddock. So I changed to other herbicides, and I changed to originally to paraquat, which everyone hates using, gramoxone. Now, gramoxone is an amazing plant, amazing herbicide, in that it will put perennial plants into dormancy. It'll put them to sleep, give them a hell of a headache, but they'll recover from it. Now, I was searching, but no one likes using it. Horrible herbicide. Really, everyone complains about Roundup or glyphosate. I think probably paraquat is a lot worse. Anyway, so I was always searching for something that was a bit more user-friendly. I came across a herbicide that you guys use a lot here, and it's used a bit in the horticulture industry in Australia, which is glufosinate, which you call Liberty. And the reason why it works okay, it works more like a desiccant herbicide like gramoxone does, but more user-friendly. Well, we think it's more user-friendly, so it's a bit safer to use and works fine. It's a bit harder on the perennial plants than gramoxone is, but I tend to use it at a bit lower rate than what's recommended. You've got to be careful with that, as we know, like with weed resistance problems and stuff. But in my system, where I'm not continuously cropping, it doesn't seem to be a problem at all. But yeah, so just a few things you to be aware of, that's all. Where these crops are grown, now this is reversed around here, like we're in the middle of our winter at the moment, so, but just look at that, as forget about the months down the bottom. I was going to change all those numbers around for you, and my computer skills weren't that clever, so I thought, I'll explain this. So, in this sense, that pink line there is the warm season C4 grasses. The blue line, C3, is a C3 crop. And we see from that, these warm season grasses go into winter dormancy, shut down for the winter. They do that naturally. And so we've got this wonderful niche here that we can plant whatever we like in. And surprise, surprise, or it shouldn't be, that's exactly how grasslands function. They're composed mostly of warm season and cool season grasses and plants. When one goes into dormancy, the other one grows. And as we saw in that grass paddock this morning, they were cool season grasses in that shows that had gone into summer dormancy because they don't like the hot weather. The warm season grasses don't like cold weather. Oh, Mother Nature's fairly clever. So, one of the things that happens with this is grazing and cropping are interconnected and complement each other. Both of them work together in this system if we get it right. This is a photo of was planting a crop in that was only last year. Grazing with sheep or cattle. We no-till plant. That's a disc drill there. Doesn't matter. Oh, sorry, speaking of this thing, it doesn't matter what the machinery really is. That's a little air seeder that I put together, and it works fine. And discs on that. I've got a tank which I play around with a bit of liquid at times. But if anything, that photo probably that I'd have liked to have grazed that harder. But the crop ended up okay. Mainly it needed grazing harder than that, just to let a little bit more sunlight in for the emerging crop. Now, it wasn't that paddock, this is another one. This here, this is just a sequence here of that we've got. That paddock has been grazed really hard, put all that material onto the soil surface. Then that's quite thick litter. Not as thick as it looks, there's no one standing under that hat. So it's probably 4 inches thick. But if you can get the litter that thick, you don't have too many weeds. And that particular paddock had no herbicide at all on it. But that's not always possible. Sometimes I can grow these crops without herbicide or pesticide. Well, I don't use pesticides at all, but without herbicides. But I can't do it consistently enough. It's not a full organic system. I just can't quite tweak it. And that's totally dependent on rain, on how good that summer grassland grows and how much biomass it creates before I plant into it. This is the same paddock here. That's the emerging crop through all that litter. And at that stage, it looks a bit like a vegetable garden. But then, it actually looks a lot like a cover crop. And that's really what it is. It just happens to be a perennial one. So at that stage, we often graze the crop. That round there. This one wasn't grazed, but we often do. Going along a bit further, the crops can be okay. In our environment, they're as good as the average crop there. They're certainly no better, but they're equal to most normally planted crops. And then we're harvesting that crop with those grasses underneath. Now, I'll just talk about this while we've got that slide up there. So that paddock there had grazing right up to the point of sowing. The grazing event was really important to mulch the grass onto the soil surface, create the litter, add a lot of manure and urine to it, which balance the carbon to nitrogen ratio a bit. As I mentioned in the paddock today, the grazing is really important to make sure that we are not planting into too much organic matter, too much litter. Otherwise, we start to need a bit more nitrogen in there. So anyway. So we've got grazing right up to the point of sowing. Sowed the crop, we often graze that crop. And this is only a single species one. I'm going to talk about multi-species in a minute. And then harvest that crop, and then afterward we're grazing. So if you think about that, it's almost impossible to lose money with it. You've got to work really hard to lose money with this system, because even if the crop was a total failure, we'd still graze it anyway. So you've still got grazing before you start and in the middle. So if it wasn't going to make grain, you've still got good grazing on it, as you do with most crops. But what we've got here is all of our grassland or pasture species still intact. So we haven't lost them, we haven't gone backwards. Always move forward. So we're grazing there again. Now, also what we're doing, almost straight up, hang on, see that photo there, those C4 grasses, warm season grasses, are shaded from emerging or growing by the crop itself. These grasses like being in full sunlight. Now, as your warm season grasses here do too, they don't like being in the shade. So the crop itself will suppress them and stop them getting up in the crop. So we can harvest a clean crop. But as soon as that crop's harvested, they just power away with the sun when you get full sun on them. They love sunlight. So those grasses, as they get up a bit further, generally before we've grazed the paddock, depending on what we want to achieve, we harvest native grass seed off these paddocks. We also often harvest seed before we sow the crop as well, so both ends. That's, as I said earlier, is one of the most profitable enterprises we have. So you're getting far more crops, so that's actually a crop in itself, really. It's a natural growing one, but that seed's really quite valuable. I'm working on, we work in kilograms at home, so it's worth about $30 $30 a pound. Yep, so quite, well worth harvesting. Now, here's another sequence, the different paddock, but the same thing, grazed, that was grazed quite okay, and that's just been sown. There, also we're seeing the dry grass between the rows there, and at that stage, and then harvest and grassland again. We're normally grazing that area just a bit after that stage. Okay, why I put these 4 photos, I've been growing different types of crops. That one is oats, that one's cereal rye, that one's wheat, and that one's oats again. So a few different crops. Now, what we can do with this is produce crops for grain or grazing. One of the best things it does, and I haven't spoken a lot about this, what we first saw, both Darryl Clough and I both saw this, and everyone that's done pasture cropping has seen this result, and we weren't expecting this. It's quite amazing. Where we planted the crop, the cereal crop of whatever type, we stimulated the germination of perennial native seed that was in the drill row where the crop had grown. And so what we stumbled upon, and it was only stumbling, and certainly no planning in this, was a way to restore grasslands. Because it was quite dramatic what happened. Now, it didn't seem to be any logic to this, because we'd cropped these areas for 50, 70 years, my father had, and we never ever saw any native grasses. And all that I did really was zero-tilled it, or no-till, reduced the fertiliser enormously and reduced the herbicide. We only had one knockdown on it. And then we started to get these grassland species in the drill rows. I've looked into this and I've asked many scientists and ecologists, mostly Christine Jones. Chris and I have worked together for years, and Chris was very involved in the development also of pasture cropping. So what we think's happening, and I'm quite sure this is the case, cereal crops, especially oats, pump a lot of sugars into the soil, root exudates into the soil when they're growing. That is designed, well, not that design, that happens to feed soil microbes. It's part of that natural process. All those sugars, the microbes feed off those sugars and then in return supply nutrient and water back to the plant. But what they are doing is restoring the soil ecosystem around the plant rhizosphere, around the roots of the plant. And what we think is happening, or we're fairly sure it is happening, that creates this very small environment for that seed to germinate, where it was too hostile to germinate before. And it sat there for decades, this seed, waiting for the right conditions to grow. And we, at least to start with, accidentally created that environment. And this happens in almost every time, providing there's some seed in the soil. If we've had an area or a paddock that had been ploughed and nuked for 50 years, there's a fair chance there won't be any seed in that. But if there's some seed in the soil, it looks as though it will stimulate the germination of them. Now, there was also some research work done on the Land Institute with pasture cropping. They found the same thing. So, and that apparently is not that far from here. So yeah, a lot of, it's almost every time you find an answer to something, you create another question. So we haven't answered all the questions yet. So it definitely will restore soil health and increase soil organic carbon. And that's related really by stimulating the grassland species and building soil. We can really build soil and soil carbon quite quickly. Well, no one can do it really quickly, but quicker than most. So, and improve the farm ecosystem as well. So, now, this is a long talk. Does anyone want to just get up and have a spell, wander around for 5 minutes or something? Yep. Okay, we can do that. Yeah. That'll give me a spell too. But no, but.